They say the worst monsters don't hide under the bed. They wear Italian silk suits and own the city skyline. Elena thought she was just doing a good deed. She thought she was saving a shivering lost child from a brutal storm. She didn't know that the boy was the only heir to the Moretti crime empire. She didn't know that by drying his tears, she was inviting the devil himself to her doorstep. And she certainly didn't know that the man coming to claim him would be the most dangerous, terrifying, and seductive mistake of her life. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a war. And it all started with a lost boy in the rain. The rain in Chicago doesn't wash things clean. It just makes the grime slicker. It was a Tuesday night in late October, the kind that chills you to the marrow, when Eleanor Vance flipped the sign on the flour bin from open to closed. The bakery was her grandmother's legacy, a small, stubborn shop on the corner of Wabash and 14th that smelled perpetually of yeast and vanilla. But tonight, the smell was overpowered by the metallic tang of the storm raging outside. Elena wiped her hands on her apron, her bank balance weighing heavily on her mind. The rent hike notice from the landlord, Mr. Henderson, was sitting by the register, a silent ticking bomb. She locked the front door, grabbed her umbrella, and headed out the back toward the alley where she parked her beat-up Honda Civic. That's when she saw it. Or rather, him. At first, it looked like a pile of discarded trash bags nestled between the dumpster and the brick wall. But then, a small, pale hand twitched. Elena froze. The city had hardened her. You don't survive alone in the South Loop without developing a certain level of caution. But the maternal instinct she buried deep down flared up instantly. She stepped closer, the rain lashing against her face. "Hey!" She called out, her voice barely audible over the thunder. "Is someone there?" The pile moved. A pair of terrified, wide eyes looked up at her. It was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 years old. He was soaked through, shaking so violently, his teeth were audibly chattering. But what struck Eleanor wasn't just his vulnerability. It was his attire. Underneath the mud and grease, the boy was wearing a miniature tailored navy suit. No coat. Just a white dress shirt clinging to his skin, and dress shoes that cost more than Eleanor's car. "Oh my God!" Elena gasped, dropping her umbrella. She rushed forward, dropping to her knees in the dirty puddle. "Sweetheart, what are you doing here?" The boy didn't speak. He flinched as she reached out, squeezing his eyes shut, as if expecting a blow. "I'm not going to hurt you," Elena said, her voice softening to a hum. She slowly unzipped her heavy wool coat. "I'm Elena. You're freezing. We need to get you inside." The boy opened his eyes. They were a striking, unnatural shade of grey, like steel. He looked at her, then at the open back door of the bakery, where warmth and light spilled out. He didn't say a word, but he nodded a tiny, jerky motion. Elena scooped him up. He was shockingly light, frail almost. She hurried him inside, locking the heavy steel door behind them and sliding the deadbolt home. Inside the bakery, the silence was jarring after the chaos of the storm. She sat him on a stool near the industrial ovens, which were still radiating residual heat. "Okay," Elena breathed, grabbing a stack of clean kitchen towels. She began drying his hair gently. "Let's get you warm. What's your name, honey?" Silence. The boy stared at the floor. "Can you talk?" she asked gently. He looked at her and touched his throat, then shook his head. "Mute or traumatized, that's okay," Elena said, forcing a cheerful smile despite the dread curling in her stomach. "We don't need to talk. I'm going to make you some hot chocolate. The real kind with melted ganache. Does that sound good?" For the first time, a flicker of light entered the boy's eyes. He nodded. As Elena bustled around the kitchen, her mind raced. Who is he? Where are his parents? She reached for her phone to call 911, but she hesitated. The boy's clothes. The terror in his reaction to her touch. Something was wrong. If he had run away from an abusive home, sending him into the foster system tonight, into the hands of overworked social workers and strange police stations, felt cruel. "I'll call in the morning," she rationalized. "Let him sleep. Let him feel safe for one night." She brought him a mug of rich cocoa and a fresh croissant. The boy ate with a ferocity that broke her heart, wiping chocolate on his expensive, ruined sleeve. "I can't let you sleep in those wet clothes," Elena murmured. She went to the back office where she kept a spare change of clothes. She found an oversized flower bin t-shirt. It would look like a dress on him, but it was dry. When she returned, the boy was holding something tight in his fist. "What do you have there?" Elena asked softly. Slowly, he opened his hand. It was a silver pin, heavy and intricate. It depicted a wolf with a dagger in its jaws. The craftsmanship was exquisite. "Is that your dad's?" she asked. The boy's face crumpled. Tears spilled silently over his cheeks. He clutched the pin to his chest and curled into a ball on the stool. Okay, I'm sorry," Eleanor soothed, picking him up again. She carried him upstairs to her small studio apartment above the shop. She tucked him into her bed, wrapping him in her duvet. "You're safe here. I promise. No one is getting in." She sat in the armchair next to the bed, watching him drift into an exhausted sleep. Meanwhile, 3 miles away, the city was burning. Lorenzo Enzo Moretti stood in the center of a warehouse in the meatpacking district. He was 32 years old, standing 6'3", with shoulders that strained the fabric of his bespoke Brioni suit. He was a man who commanded rooms simply by entering them. But tonight, the air around him crackled with a terrifying lethal energy. His consigliere, Marcus Thorne, stepped forward, his face pale. "We checked the security footage again, boss," Marcus said, his voice trembling. "The nanny, she was paid off. She left the back gate open. We found her body in the river an hour ago. But Leo, he's gone." Enzo turned slowly. His face was a mask of stone, but his eyes, those same steel-gray eyes the boy had, were burning with a cold fire. "My son has been missing for 4 hours," Enzo said. His voice was quiet, which was far worse than shouting. 4 hours in a storm. He doesn't speak, Marcus. He cannot ask for help. He is 5 years old. Enzo walked to a table where a man was tied to a chair, a rival soldier from the Volkov family. "Find him," Enzo whispered, pressing the barrel of his Sig Sauer against the man's knee. "Turn this city upside down. Tear the pavement up if you have to. If my son isn't found by sunrise, I will burn Chicago to the ground, and everyone in it." Back in the bakery, Elena drifted off to sleep in the chair, unaware that the most feared man in the Midwest had just declared war on the city, to find the boy sleeping in her bed. The morning sun didn't break through the clouds. The sky remained a bruised purple heavy with the threat of more rain. Elena woke up with a crick in her neck, realized she was in the armchair, and immediately looked at the bed. It was empty. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in her chest. "Hey," she called out, scrambling up. She ran out to the small landing. "Sweetheart, She found him downstairs in the bakery kitchen. He had dragged a stool over to the display case and was staring longingly at the strawberry tarts she had prepped yesterday. He was still wearing her oversized t-shirt, his bare feet dangling. Elena let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "You scared me," she laughed nervously, walking down. "You have a sweet tooth, don't you?" The boy looked at her and offered a shy, tentative smile. It transformed his face. He looked like an angel. "Breakfast first," Elena commanded gently. "Then a tart." As she made scrambled eggs, she tried again. "I need to call someone to help you find your parents, little one. Do you know your last name? Can you write it?" She handed him a notepad and a Sharpie. The boy hesitated. His hand shook as he held the pen. He wrote 3 letters in shaky block print, L-E-O, Leo. Elena read, "That's a beautiful name. Like a lion." Leo looked at the paper, then looked at her with intense urgency. He started drawing something else. It looked like a crest, a wolf. Before he could finish, a sound from the street made him freeze. It was the roar of engines, not just one car, but a convoy. Heavy SUVs' tires screeching against the wet asphalt. Elena looked out the front window. Her heart hammered against her ribs. 3 black Cadillac Escalades had pulled up right in front of the bakery, blocking traffic. Men in dark suits were spilling out, moving with military precision. They were stopping pedestrians, showing them a picture. "Police," Elena whispered. But they didn't look like police. They moved too aggressively. There were no badges visible, only bulges under their jackets that suggested shoulder holsters. One of the men, a giant with a scar running down his cheek, pointed at her bakery. Leo let out a whimper. He scrambled off the stool and ran to Elena, burying his face in her apron, shaking violently. Are those bad men, Leo?" Elena asked, her protective instincts overriding her fear. Leo nodded frantically. He pointed to the back door, pleading silently for her to run. "Okay," Elena said, her voice stealing. "We're going." But it was too late. The front door chimed a cheerful, innocent sound that clashed with the nightmare unfolding. The door didn't just open. It was shoved with force. A man stepped in. The air in the bakery seemed to leave the room. He was tall, dressed in a black suit that cost more than the building. His hair was dark, slicked back, and his face was strikingly handsome in a brutal, carved marble way. But it was his eyes, cold, calculating, and predatory, that made Elena take a step back. It was him, the father. The resemblance was undeniable. Lorenzo Moretti scanned the room in a split second. His eyes locked onto Elena, and then they dropped to the boy hiding behind her legs. For a second, relief washed over the man's face, raw and human. But just as quickly, it was replaced by rage. He looked at Elena, and in his mind, he didn't see a savior. He saw a woman hiding his son. He saw a kidnapper. He raised a hand, and 2 armed men rushed in behind him, guns drawn. "Don't move," Enzo snarled, his voice deep and vibrating with authority. Elena threw her hands up, but she didn't step away from Leo. She stepped in front of him, shielding his small body with her own. "Don't shoot," she screamed. "He's just a child. Put the guns down." Enzo paused. He blinked clearly, taken aback. People didn't yell orders at Lorenzo Moretti. They begged. They didn't stand in front of bullets. They ran. "Step aside, woman," Enzo commanded, walking forward. "Give me the boy." "No," Elena defied him. Her hands trembling, but her feet planted. "Look at him. He's terrified of you. I don't know who you are, but you're not taking him while you're waving guns around." The silence that followed was deafening. The men behind Enzo looked at their boss, waiting for the order to eliminate her. Enzo stopped 3 feet from her. He towered over her. He smelled of expensive cologne rain and gunpowder. He looked down at Eleanor, seeing the fire in her hazel eyes. She was small, wearing a flour-dusted apron, shaking like a leaf. Yet she was standing between the devil and his son. "You have 5 seconds," Enzo said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper, "to explain why my son is wearing your clothes before I paint these walls with your blood." "I found him," Elena shouted back, tears of fear stinging her eyes. "I found him in the alley last night. He was freezing. I brought him in. I fed him and I let him sleep. I didn't call the police because I didn't want him to be scared." Enzo's eyes narrowed. He looked past her hip down to the boy. "Leo," Enzo said softly. "Vieni qui. Come here." Leo didn't move. He gripped Elena's apron tighter. Enzo's expression fractured. The pain of his son's rejection hit him harder than a bullet. "Leo!" Elena felt the boy trembling. She knelt down, keeping one hand on Leo's back and keeping her eyes on Enzo. "Leo," she whispered. "Is this your dad?" Leo looked at Enzo, then up at Elena. He nodded slowly. "Go on," she urged gently. "It's okay." Leo slowly released her apron. He took a hesitant step toward Enzo. Enzo immediately holstered his gun, a movement so fast it was a blur, and dropped to one knee. He pulled Leo into a crushing embrace, burying his face in the boy's neck. The tension in the room snapped. The armed guards lowered their weapons. For a long minute, the only sound was the Mafia Don breathing heavily, holding his reclaimed life. Then Enzo stood up, lifting Leo effortlessly in his arms. The mask of the monster slid back into place. He turned his cold gaze back to Elena. He studied her. He looked at the cheap furniture, the cracks in the ceiling, the eviction notice sitting on the counter that she thought she had hidden. "You found him in the alley?" Enzo asked, his voice devoid of emotion now. "Yes," Elena whispered. "And you kept him safe." "I tried." Enzo stepped closer, invading her personal space. He reached out and Elena flinched. But he didn't strike her. He reached past her and picked up the eviction notice. He read it, his face unreadable. Then he crumpled it in his fist and tossed it on the floor. "You have a debt to collect, Miss Vance. Elena Vance." "Ms. Vance," Enzo said. He turned to walk out his men, parting like the Red Sea. At the door, he stopped. "My name is Lorenzo Moretti. You will be seeing me again. Nobody saves a Moretti without consequence." He walked out into the rain. Elena collapsed against the counter, her legs giving out. She watched the black SUVs peel away. She thought it was over. She thought she had survived the encounter. She didn't know that by saving Leo, she had just become the most important and targeted woman in Chicago. The eviction notice on the floor was the least of her problems now. She had caught the eye of the king, and he didn't leave loose ends. The silence that followed Enzo Moretti's departure was heavier than the storm. For the rest of the day, Elena moved through her bakery like a ghost. Every time the door chimed, she jumped, dropping a tray of scones or spilling coffee grounds. The image of those steel-grey eyes, cold, calculating, yet momentarily shattered by relief, was burned into her retinas. Lorenzo Moretti. She had Googled the name on her cracked iPhone screen during a lull in customers. The results had made her blood run cold. Head of the Chicago outfit. Suspected in 12 disappearances. Untouchable. "What have I done?" Elena whispered to the empty room, as she wiped down the counter for the 10th time. Night fell early, bringing the shadows back to the corners of the shop. Elena flipped the sign to closed and went to lock the door. As she turned the key, she saw it. Across the street, parked under the flickering street lamp where she had found Leo, was a sedan. It wasn't one of Moretti's black Escalades. It was a rusted grey Chevy. The engine was off, but two silhouettes sat inside, motionless, watching the bakery. A prickle of primal fear danced down her spine. She backed away from the window, heart hammering. Maybe they're just waiting for someone. Then her phone rang. An unknown number. Her hand trembled as she swiped answer. "Hello? Ms. Vance." The voice was deep, smooth, and terrified her more than the men outside. It was him. "Mr. Moretti," she breathed. "Lock the back door," Enzo commanded. His tone wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. "Do not go to your car. Go upstairs to your apartment. Sit on the floor, away from the windows." What's going on?" "You saved a life that half the city wanted to end," Enzo said, his voice dropping an octave. "Did you think the people who took my son would just shrug and walk away? They know who you are now. You are the loose end." Crash. The sound came from the alleyway, the distinct shattering of glass. Elena screamed, dropping the phone. "Elena!" Enzo's voice barked from the device on the floor. She scrambled back, grabbing a bread knife from the magnetic strip on the wall. The handle was slick in her sweating palm. Someone was kicking the heavy steel door in the kitchen. Thud. Thud. The metal groaned. "They're coming in," she screamed at the phone, scrambling to pick it up. "I'm already there," Enzo said. The front of the bakery exploded, not with a bomb, but with the sheer force of a vehicle ramming through the glass storefront. A black armored SUV plowed through the display cases, sending glass, wood, and pastries flying in a chaotic cloud of dust. The SUV screeched to a halt inside her shop, blocking the view of the street. The back passenger door flew open before the wheels even stopped rolling. Lorenzo Moretti stepped out. He wasn't wearing a suit jacket this time. His white dress shirt was rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and ink. He held a suppressed pistol in his right hand. He didn't look at Elena. He looked toward the kitchen door where the kicking had stopped abruptly at the sound of the crash. Enzo raised his weapon and fired 2 shots through the thin drywall next to the doorframe. Foot! Foot! A scream of pain echoed from the alley, then the sound of running footsteps fading into the night. Enzo lowered the gun and finally turned to Elena. She was pressed against the wall, clutching the bread knife, her chest heaving, covered in a fine layer of drywall dust. He holstered the gun and walked toward her. He moved with the predatory grace of a panther, silent, lethal. He stopped just outside the reach of her knife. "Put the knife down, Elena," he said softly. You destroyed my shop," she gasped, looking around at the ruin of her grandmother's legacy. The shattered glass, the crushed cakes, the exposed brick. "I saved your life," Enzo corrected. He reached out and gently pried the knife from her stiff fingers. He tossed it onto the ruined counter with a clatter. "The men in the alley were Volkovs, Russians. They weren't here to rob you. They were here to torture you to find out what you told me." Elena's legs gave out. Enzo caught her before she hit the floor. His grip was iron strong, his hands hot against her cold arms. He pulled her might, forcing her to look at him. "Listen to me," he said, his grey eyes boring into hers. "Your life as a baker is over. At least for now. As long as the Volkovs breathe, you are a target. You have a target on your back, because you were kind to my son. I just wanted to help," she sobbed, the shock finally breaking through. "I know," Enzo said. For a second his thumb brushed away a tear on her cheek, a gesture so tender it felt shocking coming from him. "And because you helped him, I will help you. But you have to come with me." "Now." "Where?" "To the only place in this city where the devil can't reach you," Enzo said. "My home." Elena looked at the wreckage of her life. She looked at the man who had brought this war to her doorstep. She realized with a sinking feeling that she had no choice. The rain was pouring in through the broken storefront, soaking her shoes. "Okay," she whispered. Enzo nodded. He took off his own vest, a bulletproof Kevlar vest she hadn't noticed under his shirt, and draped it over her shoulders. It was heavy, warm, and smelled of him. Sandalwood and danger. "Let's go." The drive to the Moretti estate took 40 minutes, moving from the grimy, slick streets of the city to the winding, tree-lined roads of the wealthy northern suburbs. Elena sat in the back of the SUV, wrapped in a blanket, staring out the tinted window. Enzo sat next to her, typing on a secure phone, ignoring her. The silence in the car wasn't empty. It was pressurized. Every now and then Enzo would glance at her, his eyes lingering on her hands, which were still shaking, before looking away. They arrived at a set of wrought iron gates that looked like they belonged to a medieval fortress. They swung open silently. The driveway wound up a hill, revealing a sprawling stone mansion that looked less like a home and more like a mausoleum. It was beautiful, grand, and utterly cold. "Welcome to Purgatory," Enzo muttered dryly as the car stopped. "You live here?" Elena asked, looking at the towering columns. "I exist here," he corrected. Inside the house was a museum of marble and shadows. There were no family photos, no toys, no signs of life. Just armed men standing in corners, nodding respectfully as Enzo passed. "Where is Leo?" Elena asked. Enzo stopped. His shoulders stiffened. "Upstairs, in his room. He hasn't been well." He led her up a grand staircase to a heavy oak door at the end of the hall. A guard stood outside. "Leave us," Enzo ordered. The guard vanished. Enzo hesitated with his hand on the doorknob. The powerful Mafia Don looked for a fleeting second, helpless. "He won't eat," Enzo admitted quietly, not looking at Elena. "He hasn't eaten since you fed him yesterday. He won't speak. He just sits there. The doctors want to sedate him, but I won't allow it." He looked at Elena. "He keeps asking for the bakery lady." Elena's heart twisted. She pushed past Enzo and opened the door. The room was massive, filled with expensive toys that looked untouched. In the center was a 4-poster bed that looked too big for a king, let alone a child. In the corner, huddled under a fort made of pillows and blankets, was Leo. "Leo," Elena called softly. The pillow fort shifted. A pair of grey eyes peeked out. "Elena." It was a raspy whisper, but it was the first time Enzo had heard his son speak in 2 days. Leo scrambled out of the blankets. He was wearing silk pajamas, but he looked small and frail. He ran across the room and slammed into Elena's legs. Elena dropped to her knees, hugging him back fiercely. "Oh, honey, you're okay. I'm here." Enzo stood in the doorway, watching. He leaned against the frame, crossing his arms. He watched the way his son, who flinched when Enzo tried to touch him, melted into this stranger's arms. A pang of jealousy struck him, sharp and bitter, followed immediately by a wave of gratitude so strong it nearly brought him to his knees. "I brought you something." Elena lied, improvising. She looked at Enzo. Do you have a kitchen in this museum? Enzo blinked. Of course. Good. I need flour, sugar, butter, and strawberries. Now. Enzo Moretti, the man who commanded an army of killers, nodded. I'll have the chef bring it up. No, Elena said, standing up and holding Leo's hand. We're going down. Leo needs to get out of this room. It smells like sadness in here. She walked past Enzo, leading his son by the hand. As she passed him, she stopped. She looked up at him. She had to crane her neck to meet his eyes. And you're helping, she added. Enzo's eyebrows shot up. Excuse me. You're his father. Elena said, her voice trembling slightly, but her chin high. He needs to see you doing something normal, not shooting walls. Enzo stared at her. The audacity. No one spoke to him like this. But then he looked at Leo. Leo was watching him hiding behind Eleanor's leg, waiting to see if the monster would roar. Enzo let out a long, ragged sigh. He unbuttoned his cuffs and rolled his sleeves up further. Fine, he grunted. But if you get flour on my Italian marble, you clean it up. The scene in the kitchen was surreal. The Moretti kitchen was industrial-grade, stainless steel and cold. Elena turned it into a chaotic mess within 20 minutes. She lifted Leo onto the counter. Okay, Chef Leo, you crack the eggs. Leo smashed an egg. Shell went everywhere. He looked terrified for a second, glancing at his father. Enzo stood awkwardly by the fridge. Well? Elena looked at Enzo. Are you going to help him pick out the shells, or are you just going to stand there, looking brooding and expensive? Enzo walked over. He moved next to Leo. He used his large, calloused fingers. Fingers that had ended lives to delicately pick out tiny fragments of eggshell from the bowl. Like this, Leo. Enzo murmured, his voice rumbling in his chest. Gentle. Leo looked up at his father. Like this, he whispered, mimicking the motion. Si, Enzo said. Perfect. For the first time in his life, Enzo saw a genuine smile on his son's face directed at him. They baked tart shells. The smell of baking pastry began to fill the sterile house, chasing away the cold. Elena watched them from the oven. Enzo was covered in flour. There was a smudge of white on his cheek. He looked younger, less like a monster, more like a man trying to figure out a puzzle he didn't understand. As the tarts baked, the atmosphere shifted. The adrenaline of the attack was fading, replaced by a heavy, confused exhaustion. Enzo washed his hands and turned to Elena. They were standing close. The heat from the oven radiated between them. You have a gift, Enzo said quietly. He wasn't looking at the tarts. He was looking at her. I just treat him like a child, Elena said, wiping her hands on a towel. Not like an heir. Enzo's face darkened slightly. In this world, he is both. I cannot change that. You can let him be a boy first, Elena challenged softly. Enzo took a step closer. The air between them crackled. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was attraction. A dark, magnetic pull. Elena felt her breath hitch. He was dangerous. He had destroyed her shop. He was keeping her prisoner, essentially. But standing here with flour on his face, looking at her with those intense, storm-grey eyes, she felt a pull she couldn't deny. You are staying here, Enzo stated. It wasn't a question. I know, Elena said. Because of the Volkovs. No, Enzo said. Stepping so close, she could feel the heat radiating off him. He lowered his voice, so Leo, who was licking the spoon, couldn't hear. "Because if you leave, the light goes out of this house again. And I can't go back to the dark." He reached out his hand, hovering near her face. He wanted to touch her. He wanted to claim the woman who had saved his world. But he pulled back. "The guest wing is prepared," he said abruptly, his voice turning cold again, putting the mask back on. "Sleep well, Miss Vance. Tomorrow we discuss the rules of your confinement." He turned and walked out, leaving Elena standing in the warmth of the kitchen, feeling colder than ever. She looked at Leo, who was happily eating raw dough. She was safe from the Volkovs, yes. But as she watched Enzo's broad back disappear into the shadows of the hallway, she wondered if she was safe from him, or more dangerously, if she was safe from herself. Because for a second, there she hadn't wanted him to stop. 3 days passed inside the Moretti estate. To an outsider, it might have looked like a vacation. The pantry was stocked with French wines and imported chocolates. The sheets were Egyptian cotton. But to Elena, it felt like living inside the chest cavity of a sleeping dragon. The house breathed with a low, dangerous rhythm. She fell into a strange routine. Mornings were for Leo. They read books in the library, built elaborate forts in the living room, and baked in the industrial kitchen. The staff men with bulges under their jackets and earpieces watched her with a mix of suspicion and awe. She was the woman who made the Don's son laugh. That made her untouchable, but it also made her an alien species in their world of violence. Evenings, however, belonged to the silence, and the silence belonged to Enzo. He was a ghost in his own home. He would leave before dawn and return long after Elena had put Leo to bed. She would hear the heavy thud of the front door, the low murmur of Marcus giving reports, and then the heavy footsteps retreating to the west wing where his private study was located. On the 4th night, the silence broke. Elena couldn't sleep. The storm outside was relentless, mimicking the night she found Leo. She went down to the kitchen for a glass of water. On her way back up, she saw the door to the west wing ajar. A sliver of golden light spilled onto the dark hallway floor. She meant to keep walking. She knew the rules do not disturb the work. But then she heard a sound that stopped her cold. A hiss of pain. Sharp, suppressed, and undeniably human. Without thinking, Elena pushed the door open. Enzo was sitting behind his massive mahogany desk. The room smelled of old paper whiskey and the metallic copper scent of fresh blood. He was shirtless, his dress shirt discarded on the floor in a ruined heap. He was trying to wrap a gauze bandage around his left bicep, but the angle was awkward, and blood was slicking his skin, making the tape slip. He looked up as the door creaked. His hand instinctively went for the gun sitting on the desk blotter. When he saw it was her, his muscles didn't relax, but he didn't raise the weapon. "Get out," he growled. His voice was rough, lacking its usual smooth polish. Elena didn't move. She stared at the wound. It was a graze likely from a bullet, but it was deep and angry. "You're bleeding," she stated, stepping into the room. "An astute observation." Enzo sneered, wincing as he tightened the gauze. "I told you to get out, Elena. I am not decent, and I am not in the mood for pleasantries." "I'm not here to be pleasant. I'm here because you're making a mess." Elena walked over to the desk. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, but she forced her hands to be steady. She reached for the gauze. "Let me do it." Enzo stared at her. His eyes were dark, dilated with pain and adrenaline. "I don't need your help." "Clearly you do," she countered softly. She gently batted his hand away. "Sit still." Enzo froze. No one touched him. Not like this. His life was a series of violent collisions or transactional exchanges. Tenderness was a language he had forgotten how to speak. He watched her as she worked. She cleaned the wound with the antiseptic on the desk, her brow furrowed in concentration. Her fingers were warm against his cold skin. He could smell her vanilla and flour, a stark contrast to the whiskey and blood that coated him. "Who did this?" Elena asked quietly, not looking up. "Does it matter?" Enzo replied. "They are dead." Elena paused. She looked up at him. They were inches apart. She could see the flecks of silver in his irises, the exhaustion etched into the lines around his eyes. She saw the tattoos on his chest scars of old battles, names of dead friends, religious iconography that seemed ironic on a man who dealt in sin. "It matters," she whispered, "because every time you come home like this, Leo thinks you're not coming back." Enzo's jaw tightened. "I do this to keep him safe. To keep you safe." "Is this safety?" Elena gestured to the bloody shirt on the floor. "Or is it just a slow death?" Enzo stood up abruptly. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. He towered over her, the sudden movement radiating menace. "Do not lecture me on survival, Baker. You live in a world of sugar and yeast. I live in a world where men like Nikolai Volkov will skin a child alive to send a message. I am the wall that stands between you and the monsters, and sometimes the wall gets chipped." "I know," Elena said, refusing to back down. She reached out her hand, hovering over his uninjured arm. "I know you're the wall, Enzo, but even walls crumble if they don't have support." She laid her hand on his arm. The contact was electric. Enzo sucked in a sharp breath. He looked at her hand, then up at her lips. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with a magnetism that had been building for days. The violence of the night faded, replaced by a different kind of intensity. Enzo raised his hand. His thumb traced her jawline rough against her soft skin. He leaned in his eyes, dropping to her mouth. "Elena," he whispered, a warning and a plea wrapped in one. She tilted her head up, her breath hitching. She wanted him to kiss her. She wanted to know what the fire behind those cold eyes felt like. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was polite, rhythmic, and shattered the moment like a hammer hitting glass. Enzo pulled back instantly, the mask slamming back into place. He turned to the door. "Enter." Marcus walked in, his face pale. He held a small black velvet box in his hands. He looked at Elena, then at Enzo's shirtless, bandaged form, and quickly averted his eyes. "Boss?" Marcus said, his voice tight. "This was just found at the front gate. The guards didn't see who dropped it." Enzo walked over his stride, long and angry. He took the box. It looked like a jewelry box. He opened it. The color drained from his face. He slammed the lid shut immediately, but not before Elena saw it. Inside the box wasn't a ring or a threat note. It was a small plastic figurine. An astronaut. Elena gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. That's Leo's. It was in his pocket the day he was taken," Enzo said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. "He lost it in the van." "Why send it back?" Elena whispered. Enzo looked at Marcus. "Check the box for fingerprints. Check it for chemical agents." "There was a note, boss," Marcus said, handing him a folded piece of cardstock. Enzo opened it. He read it, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He handed the note to Elena. It was written in elegant cursive handwriting. "The wall is tall, Lorenzo, but every castle has a rat. Kiss the boy good night for us." Enzo looked at Elena. "They didn't leave this at the gate." "What?" Elena asked. "The sensors at the gate were never tripped," Enzo said, looking toward the dark hallway of his own home. "This was placed on the doorstep from the inside." Paranoia is a potent poison. In the 24 hours following the discovery of the astronaut figurine, the mansion transformed from a sanctuary into a prison. Enzo doubled the guard. He fired 3 members of the household staff, whom he deemed unvetted despite them having worked there for years. He locked down the perimeter so tight that not even a stray cat could cross the lawn without thermal cameras picking it up. But the threat wasn't coming from the lawn. It was Saturday evening. Enzo had planned a family dinner. It was a farce, of course, an attempt to project normalcy for Leo's sake. He sat at the head of the long dining table, wearing a fresh tuxedo, while Leo sat to his right, poking at his risotto. Elena sat across from Leo, wearing a silk dress Enzo had ordered for her. It was emerald green, beautiful, and felt like armor. "Eat, Leo," Enzo said gently. "I'm not hungry," Leo murmured. He was clutching the astronaut figurine, which had been cleaned and returned to him. He didn't know where it came from. He just knew it was back. "The risotto is good," Elena encouraged, forcing a smile. "It has the mushrooms you like." The lights flickered. Enzo froze his fork halfway to his mouth. They flickered again. Then the massive crystal chandelier above them died. The room plunged into darkness. "Stay down," Enzo roared. A split second later, the emergency red mood lighting kicked in, bathing the room in a blood-colored glow. "Marcus," Enzo shouted into the air. "Status." No answer. The house intercom was dead. "Daddy," Leo whimpered. Enzo was out of his chair in a blur. He moved to Leo, scooping the boy up with one arm while drawing his gun with the other. He grabbed Elena's wrist. "We move to the panic room. Now!" he commanded. They ran into the hallway. It was eerily silent. There were no alarms, no shouting guards, just the hum of the emergency generator and the drumming of rain against the windows. "Where are your men?" Elena hissed as they hurried toward the library, where the hidden entrance to the safe room was located. "That," Enzo said grimly, checking a corner with his weapon raised, "is the question." They reached the library. Enzo pushed open the heavy oak doors. He stopped. Sitting in Enzo's leather armchair, illuminated by the red emergency light, was a man. He was holding a glass of Enzo's whiskey. It wasn't Nikolai Volkov. It was Frank, the head of security, the man who had driven Eleanor from the bakery, the man Enzo had trusted with his son's life for 5 years. Frank smiled. He had a gun resting on his lap. "Evening, boss." Enzo didn't blink. He pushed Elena and Leo behind him, shielding them with his body. "Frank, I pay you $500,000 a year. Volkov must have offered you a retirement plan." "It's not about the money, Enzo," Frank said, taking a sip of whiskey. "It's about the longevity. You're losing your touch. You let a baker and a mute kid make you soft. Volkov, he's the future. Where are my men? The loyal ones dead in the break room. The smart ones, they're outside letting the Russians in." Elena felt Leo shaking against her leg. She looked around the room. There was only one other exit, the servants' door behind the bookshelves, but it was 10 feet away. "You can't win this, Enzo," Frank said, standing up. Volkov is here. He just wants the boy. Give us the boy, and you and the girl can walk away." "Maybe," Enzo laughed. It was a dark, terrifying sound. "You think I would trade my blood for my life? You never knew me at all, Frank. Have it your way." Frank raised his gun. Bang! The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. Elena screamed, covering Leo's ears, but Enzo didn't fall. Frank stumbled back, a look of shock on his face. A red flower bloomed on his chest. He collapsed back into the chair, the whiskey glass shattering on the floor. Enzo stood there, smoke curling from the barrel of his gun. He hadn't hesitated. He hadn't bargained. He had simply executed. "Go!" Enzo yelled, grabbing Elena. "You shot him!" She gasped, shock rattling her brain. "He was already dead," Enzo said, dragging her toward the secret passage behind a false bookcase. He just didn't know it. He punched a code into a hidden keypad. The bookcase groaned and swung open, revealing a steel staircase leading down into darkness. "Get inside," Enzo ordered. "Aren't you coming?" Elena asked, realizing he wasn't stepping onto the stairs. Enzo shook his head. He reloaded his weapon, his movements precise and mechanical. "If they are inside the panic room, is just a coffin. I have to buy you time. I have to reset the system from the server room in the basement. It's the only way to lock the house down and signal for backup." "No." Elena grabbed his arm. "There are dozens of them. You'll be killed." Enzo looked at her. The red light cast shadows across his sharp cheekbones. He looked like the devil, but he looked at her with the eyes of a martyr. He cupped her face. His hands were steady. "Elena," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I told you. I am the wall." He leaned in and kissed her. It was hard, desperate, and tasted of despair. It lasted only a second, but it seared through Elena like a brand. "Take care of my son," he whispered against her lips. Then he shoved her into the darkness and hit the button. "Enzo," she screamed. The bookcase slammed shut, sealing her and Leo in the silence of the walls. On the other side, she heard Enzo walk away. Then she heard the front doors of the mansion blow open, and the roar of automatic gunfire erupted, tearing the silence apart. Elena sat in the dark on the cold metal stairs, holding a weeping Leo, listening to the man she was falling in love with fight a war all by himself. She realized then that the story wasn't about a girl saving a boy. It was about a king dying to save them both. But Elena Vance wasn't just a damsel anymore. She felt the heavy weight of the spare pistol Enzo had slipped into her dress pocket right before he pushed her in. She stood up in the darkness. "Come on, Leo," she whispered, wiping her tears. "We're not just going to hide." The secret passage didn't lead to freedom. It led to a vantage point. Through a hidden grate, Eleanor looked down into the grand foyer. The scene below was a painting of carnage. Enzo was on his knees. He was bleeding from a fresh wound in his shoulder, his gun empty on the floor 3 feet away. Standing over him was a man Elena recognized from the news, Nikolai Volkov. The Russian Don smiled, his gold tooth glinting in the emergency red light. "The King of Chicago," Volkov spat, aiming a desert eagle at Enzo's forehead. "You look tired, Lorenzo. Don't worry. I'll take good care of the boy." Enzo looked up defiant to the end. "You touch him, and I will claw my way out of hell to drag you down with me. Say hello to the devil for me." Volkov chuckled, his finger tightening on the trigger. Elena didn't think. She didn't weigh the moral consequences. She just remembered the warmth of Enzo's hand on her face and the way Leo smiled when he cracked an egg. She raised the spare pistol Enzo had given her. Her hands were shaking, but at this distance she couldn't miss the man's broad back. Bang! The shot rang out louder than thunder. Volkov jerked forward, a look of pure confusion on his face, as he crumbled to the marble floor, a bullet lodged in his spine. The room froze. The two remaining Russian soldiers spun around, aiming at the grate high on the wall. But Enzo was faster. In the split second of distraction, he lunged for his discarded gun. 2 shots double-tapped center mass. The soldiers dropped before they could even locate Elena. Silence returned to the mansion, heavy and smoking. "Elena!" Enzo called out, his voice raw. He looked up at the grate, fear in his eyes for the first time that night. The bookcase door groaned open. Elena stepped out, still holding the smoking gun, her green dress stained with dust. Leo ran out from behind her, sprinting down the stairs. "Daddy!" Enzo caught his son with his good arm, burying his face in Leo's neck. Then he looked up at Elena. He didn't see a baker. He didn't see a victim. He saw a woman who had just crossed the line of no return for him. He stood up, wincing, and extended his hand to her. Elena walked down the grand staircase. She didn't look at Volkov's body. She looked only at Enzo. When she reached him, he didn't say thank you. He pulled her into him, kissing her with a ferocity that tasted of blood and survival. "You stayed," he whispered against her mouth. "I couldn't leave my family," Elena replied, breathless. Enzo pulled back, searching her eyes. "There is no going back now, Elena. You killed a Don. You are part of this life." Elena looked at the gun in her hand, then at Leo holding onto Enzo's leg, and finally at the man who would burn the world for her. "I know," she said, dropping the gun. "So when do we redecorate? This red lighting is awful." 6 months later, the flower bin reopened. But it wasn't on the corner of Wabash anymore. It was a sleek, high-end patisserie in the Gold Coast, funded by anonymous investors. Elena stood behind the counter, boxing up a dozen cannolis. A man in a sharp suit walked in, Lorenzo Moretti. He walked straight to the counter, ignoring the whispers of the customers. "I'm here to collect a debt," he said, his eyes dancing with amusement. "I thought I paid you back." Elena smiled, leaning over the counter. "Interest rates are high," Enzo murmured, leaning in to kiss her. Outside, the rain began to fall, washing the city streets. But Elena wasn't afraid of the storm anymore. She was the storm. And that is the story of how Elena Vance went from hunting dough to ruling an empire. She found a lost boy in the rain and ended up finding her destiny. It's a reminder that sometimes the things that scare us the most are the things worth fighting for. Elena and Enzo proved that even in a world of darkness, loyalty and love are the most dangerous weapons of all. What did you think of Elena's choice in the end? Would you have pulled the trigger, or would you have run? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please smash that like button and subscribe. It helps me bring more twisted, dramatic stories to life for you. And don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss a chapter. Until next time, stay safe and watch out for lost boys in the rain.